name is Rachel, and this is my February wrap-up. I did pretty well in February. I am participating currently in a reading challenge for librarians in my area. We're trying to read as many books that appeal to teens as possible. So this can be YA books, or it can be adult books that appeal to teens. It can be graphic novels, audiobooks, anything. Just think titles that would appeal to teens. So I read a ton of YA, and I think this really kind of helped push me to read a little bit more than I might have otherwise. So overall, I'm pretty happy with my reading month. I think I read a total of 15, so let's jump into the titles. First up, I read Busted by Gina Sioka, I believe. I listened to this as an audiobook, and I wasn't crazy about this one. It's a YA contemporary about a girl who basically ends up as a like a cheater's cam sleuth. She catches her best friend's boyfriend kissing somebody else, tells them, she gets some photos as proof, and things kind of go downhill from there, and she kind of gets pulled into some drama. I thought this was super angsty. I didn't think there was enough plot to even out the angst, and I just didn't care for it that much. I constantly felt like I wanted the story to keep moving along, so I could get to the conclusion of the story. So I gave it a 2 out of 5 stars. Next up, I read Solo by Kwame Alexander, and I was very surprised by this one. The whole story is told in verse from the perspective of the child of a rock star, kind of an infamous rock star. His dad's had a lot of trouble with, I think it's alcohol, maybe drugs as well, I can't remember, after the death of his mother, and his career is kind of going up in flames. He's really struggling with his addiction, and we get the perspective of this child that is kind of struggling to fit in this world. And I feel like this went way off on a tangent for me. I wasn't expecting anything to happen, but it's presented as like a diary sort of, or a journal through song lyrics or verse, and it felt natural, even though it went way off key from what I was expecting, because I feel like that's what would happen in your journal. Like, as things progress, you just compile them in your journal. So even though I was not expecting the way things went down, it felt okay. And even though it was told in verse, and I feel like sometimes I don't see a lot of character development with books in verse, I did feel it in this one. I felt like there was some character growth from the beginning to the end. So I really liked this one. I was surprised. I didn't think from the description that this would be one I was super into, but I wanted to read it because we have it on the shelves at the schools that I work in. But I ended up giving it a 4 out of 5. Next up, I read a graphic novel called Pashmina by Nidihi Chanani, I think. And I was really disappointed in this one. I'd been looking so forward to this, about an Indian girl with this magical pashmina, and I was looking so forward to it, but I feel like it already sets itself up for a little bit of a disadvantage in a graphic novel setting, because they tend to be a little bit choppy and not super cohesive. But I felt like this one, it was just a lot. Like, I literally felt like I had pages missing out of my book. Like, I just missed some of the plot lines. And maybe it's just me, but I wanted more from this one than what I got. So I gave it a 2 out of 5, but I loved the idea of it. I really thought it was going to be cool. Next up, I read Bull by David Elliott. This is a kind of contemporary rap style verse retelling of the Greek myth of the Minotaur in the maze on the island of Crete. And I was very surprised by this one as well. I thought this was pretty well done. I wanted a little bit more detail in some areas and probably a little bit less detail in some other places, but I really enjoyed the way they did this one. I think it would be really interesting to pair it with a more straightforward version of this myth, but in all, I gave it 3.5 out of 5 stars. Next up, I read Turn It Up by Jen Kalanita. I did this one because it came out with our book fair that we just recently did. This is marketed as very much like a pitch perfect book version for teens and middle grade. And that really is what it was. It's the story of these two best friends in high school who are the co-captains of their teams, their high school's a cappella girl group. And they have a huge rivalry with the boy a cappella group. And right off the bat, the two girls get into it over a guy. And it really kind of breaks apart the group. And again, I found this to be very angsty and a little too angsty for the plot. I did like this a little bit better though than Busted. It had some redeeming qualities to it, and I did like some of the characters. I felt like the two main girls though were just so dramatic that I had a hard time getting over them to enjoy the rest of it. So I gave it a 3 out of 5. Next up, I read Simon versus the Homo Sapiens Agenda by Becky Albertalli. I specifically read this one, A, because of the hype, and B, because the movie's getting ready to come out and it looks adorable. So I wanted to read the book first, and I didn't love it as much as I expected to. I ended up giving it 3 out of 5 stars. If you're not sure about what this one is, basically this closeted boy at the high school strikes up kind of an online email romance exchange with an anonymous boy from his high school who is also closeted. And he basically gets blackmailed by this other kid who realizes what's happening. And I really didn't like a lot of the characters in this. I didn't like, again, like the angst and some of the ways things were handled. But overall, I thought it was cute. I really like the LGBT representation in this book. And I like how even though it was a main focus, it wasn't like, it didn't feel like the romance between the two boys was in there just to catch people's attention. Like, it was supposed to be kind of like a real life coming of age story of somebody just like that. I feel like sometimes now, since it's such a buzzword to be LGBTQ plus in books, they throw it in there just to have that label. And even though it was a main focus of this book, it felt natural to be in there, which I did like about this one. But overall, it was just, I don't know, again, a little bit angsty. And maybe it was just me. I gave a lot of 3s this month. I just wasn't finding things that I really connected with this month. So I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars, but I would definitely recommend this to my students looking for romances featuring LGBTQ plus characters. I thought this was interesting. And I'm looking forward to the spinoff with Leah, called Leah and the Offbeat, coming out later this year. I think that'll be interesting. I would like to get more of Leah because she kind of seemed a little annoying in this book to me. I'm hoping she turns out to be just like a kick-ass character, though, in her own book. Next, I read an arc that I had really been looking forward to. It's called Notes from My Captivity by Kathy Parks. This one I was super excited for because one of my favorite books is Stolen by Lucy Christopher. So I'm always looking for something that kind of resembles that because I'm always craving it. And this one kind of piqued that interest for me. It follows the story of this girl who goes on an adventure to Siberia with her stepdad to try to find this mythical long-lost family. This family is, if they're alive, because that's like kind of the big question, do they really exist? If they're alive, they've been living off the grid for ages, and there's all these rumors about them, like they're murderers, they're cannibals, they're horrible people, all these things, and she's going with her stepdad. She doesn't believe in the family. The stepdad very much believes in the family, and they go on this trek, and immediately disaster strikes, and she's kidnapped by the family. So, you know, a little hint to you, the family is real, which isn't much of a spoiler because it happens pretty quickly in the book. Most of the story is about her with this family, and it took some turns I wasn't expecting. And originally, I didn't like this character, but I did get a little bit of the Stolen vibes that I got off of Lucy Christopher's book. It's kind of reminds me of like a Stockholm Syndrome situation, which I feel like to some extent would happen anytime you get kidnapped and are living with people for like a huge length of time. Once you get to know them a little bit, I think you always have some sort of a sympathy for them as long as they're not like torturing you, because I mean, you see their humanity and it brings out your humanity. So overall, I was a little bit disappointed with this one. I gave it a 3 out of 5. It wasn't anything that blew my mind, but it was an interesting read. And that one will be coming out later in this spring. I think it's either in I think it's in April. I'm pretty sure it comes out in April. Next up, I read a graphic novel, Bob's Burgers Medium Rare by Lauren Borchard. I love Bob's Burgers, and these are always just like little snippets from the kids' point of view. You get the point of view from Tina. All of her little short pieces are the, oh, I can't think of it now. Her little, what does she call it? It's the friend fiction. It's like naughty friend fiction. Erotic. It's erotic friend fiction, which by itself is hilarious. So you get those stories with Tina. I don't remember what Louise's is. It's always like some sort of like plot though. Like something she's like cooked up, some scheme. And then Jean's usually has some sort of musical element to it. It's usually kind of like a sing-song version. And it's just like the show. It's just, you know, dumb little shenanigans that they get into, but they're so funny and so cute. I love Bob's Burgers, so of course I enjoy these. You do get a lot more of the kids though than necessarily the whole family and all the rest of the characters, but that's still fun. It's a nice little connection with the show. I gave it a 3 out of 5. Again, nothing that blows your mind, but just kind of an average, enjoyable read. Next up, I read another graphic novel. This one was Black Panther, Book 1 by Ta-Nehisi Coates. I read this because obviously Black Panther is coming out, and I thought this would be a huge book that students that I work with request. I think, though, that I missed something, because I feel like when I jumped in, I really had no idea what was going on. But I did go into this not knowing much about Black Panther, because I don't follow, like, any of the superhero stuff, so I don't know what's happening ever in any of those. So I feel like I need to get some background information, and I probably would have enjoyed this more, but I felt a little lost through this one. But the actual comic book itself, without me being lost, was pretty good. It was pretty entertaining, very fast-paced, really good illustrations. I was very interested to see how Ta-Nehisi Coates would work with this graphic novel, so I thought it worked out well. Again, overall, it didn't blow my mind, but it was pretty good. I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. The next 2 books I read were both for book clubs. The first one was for my adult book club that I participate in, and we read Hackseed by Margaret Atwood. This is actually the first Margaret Atwood book I read, and this is part of the Shakespeare retelling. Of course, now that I'm talking about it, I can't remember the name of the books, but there's a whole series where they have famous authors rewriting like kind of contemporary Shakespeare versions of the plays. I know that Ann Tyler wrote one called Vinegar Girl. I know that Joe Nesbo is writing Macbeth, and I know that Gillian Flynn is writing Hamlet, I think. Now that I said that, I'm not sure. I'm pretty sure she's Hamlet. So they're all big names writing these, so it's kind of an interesting take on them, and this is the first one that I've read in the series. Again, this one's Hackseed, and it's a version of The Tempest. And I love how she tied in The Tempest with this. In her version, we follow a man who's kind of down on his luck. He got kicked out of his job as a community theater director, and he's really depressed about it. He's already lost his wife and his daughter, and now he's lost his job, so he's living in this kind of shack out in the middle of nowhere, very depressed, and he decides he wants to re-enter the theater. So he takes on a job as an instructor for a local prison, and he works with the convicts, the criminals in the prison, to put on these Shakespeare plays. And it kind of skips over how he really gets in at first with the guys, which I would have liked to see more of, but it kind of fast forwards into The Tempest, which is the one that our main character really wants to put on. And it was so much fun seeing his interactions with these criminals and getting them involved in these Shakespeare plays, and he comes up with a big scheme of his own, and it was very entertaining. I enjoyed this one way more than I was expecting to, and I'm so glad I read it. I can't wait to read the other Shakespeare adaptations. I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars. Again, I wasn't blown away, but I did enjoy it a lot more than I was expecting to. So next I read By Your Side by Casey West. This again was a book club pick. This I read with my high school students, and they did not like it, I have to say. But I love Casey, or Cassie. I don't know which one's correct. I've always said Casey, but I've been hearing Cassie lately, so I'm not sure. I'm probably going to keep calling her Casey West, though, because that's what's stuck in my head. But anyway, By Your Side, this was a reread for me, and I love her books. I think they're just light, easy contemporaries with cute romance, and not like over the top, in your face, raunchy romance. So it's a nice little break from all the doom and gloom that we get around all the time. By Your Side, if you haven't read it, is about a girl who ends up locked in the library over the long weekend with a mysterious boy from her school. And oh my gosh, I was sold at that point. But of course, everything's a little bit deeper than what it seems at the top, and we get to know these characters a lot. And Dax, the main character, is one of my favorite of Casey West's male leads. I really, really like Dax. But I think my favorite one, though, is Seth from Lucky in Love, I have to say. But I do like By Your Side. I like the library element. I thought it was cute. I gave it a 4.5 out of 5 stars. Next up, I read March Volume 1 by John Lewis. I thought this was a very interesting way to present this information. I have been hearing so much about these, so I definitely wanted to give it a read. And overall, I liked it. I felt like it was a nice way to condense all the information about the civil rights movement without making it seem shallow. So overall, I enjoyed this one. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. And then finally, with my next book, I finally hit a stride. I'd been doing 3, 3.5, 3 stars all year long so far. I really hadn't had a great book, and these next few were all really good. So I finally ended the month with some fantastic books. So next up, I read Bingle Love by T. Franklin. This is a graphic novel about 2 Black women who meet each other at church bingo and fall in love in the 60s. So obviously this is a big no-no for their culture and their time, and they end up pulled apart. They end up marrying men they don't really love and creating families, and they finally meet back up 30, 40 years later, and I think it's probably more 20, 30 years later, after they have their families, they meet back up again at church bingo, and they decide it's time for them to be together. And it's adorable. I love the plot. I love the idea. I love the pictures. I love the colors. Oh my gosh. I loved their outfits so much. I wish I could have their style. That's all I'm going to say about it. But I really enjoyed this one. I have to warn you, it is a little tearjerkery at the end, so just be prepared. I gave this one 4.5 out of 5 stars. I really, really liked this one. Next up is an arc that I got, and I was so excited to get this one. I read From Twinkle with Love by Sandhya Menon. I loved When Dimple Met Rishi, and this is very much in the same vein. We have an Indian girl and an Indian boy kind of in this awkward romance situation, and I really, really loved it. I ended up giving it a 5 out of 5 stars, and I'm so sad that I have no one to talk about with this book because I so enjoyed it. I loved this book. I cannot wait to buy my copy when it comes out. I believe it comes out in April. It's either April or May. I don't remember now, but I will be getting a official finished copy as soon as possible. Loved it. I loved it. And I'm hoping to do a more full review closer to when the book comes out, so stay tuned for that. Last up, I read The World of Lore Monstrous Creatures by Aaron Mahnke. I have been listening to the podcast for this for a while, and they're starting a new book club at my library, my local library, called The Pod People, and they're mixing books and podcasts together, and the first pairing is lore. Now, I will say I was a little disappointed because I was expecting a lot more new content with a book, and it was mostly episodes of the podcast just put into book form. They specifically focused on monstrous characters, so ghosts, werewolves, vampires, that type of thing. They took those stories from the podcast and put them in this book. There were a few new pieces, though, that were added in that were fun to read, and the content of the lore podcasts themselves are very entertaining and awesome. So, I mean, it wasn't awful to read them again, but I was hoping for more new content, if that makes sense. So, I ended up giving it a 4 out of 5. I loved the content, but I'd already kind of taken in a lot of it through the podcast, so it just didn't seem quite what I wanted. So, I gave it a 4 out of 5. So, there you have it, the 15, woo-hoo, the 15 books I managed to get to in February. I'm super excited. I've got some really big plans for March. I'm going to be participating in 2 readathons, plus the Teen Reading Challenge is still going strong for the month of March, and I've already finished one book this month, and I am just super excited to read. So hopefully I will have another fantastic wrap up for you at the end of March. So thank you for watching, and I will see you again soon with another video. Bye for now.